Do you have any idea how powerful staff networks can be? Today, I'm reviewing a book that explains this power and how you can harness it. I'm Jonathan Ashong-Lamptey, and this is the Resource Groups podcast, where every week I connect the dots in terms of best practices and practical research to help the people within your workplace reach their potential and drive performance through inclusive practices. I'm on a mission to give you the tools that you need to make a difference where you work. Get your pen and paper ready, because in today's show, I'm going to be reviewing one of the only books in the world that is directly concerned with employee resource groups, or as the book calls them, staff networks. The book is called The Incredible Power of Staff Networks, and its author is Sharon Inko-Taria. Sharon is a previous guest and a friend of the show, and she's one of only two people who have made multiple appearances on the podcast. She's also the founder of the National Day for Staff Networks in the UK. This is a day that celebrates the importance and achievements of staff networks all over the country. As always, my intention here is to provide a general review of the book, and in doing so, I'm going to ask a number of important questions. 1. Why is the book important? 2. Who is this book for? 3. What are the key messages of the book? 4. What are the key takeaways of the book? And 5. Other considerations. So let's get to it. Why is this book important? This book is important because it's certainly the first book that I've ever come across that was concerned exclusively with employee resource groups. And for the rest of the show, I'm actually going to call them staff networks because that's how they're referred to in the book. Now I want you to indulge me for a second. I want you to think about any of the books that you've read about diversity and inclusion in the workplace. Now I want you to think about how many of them mention staff networks. If your experience is like mine, you probably couldn't come up with many books. Or if you did, the guidance about them would be pretty superficial. And any emphasis on staff networks is really just to say that they should be there. It's something that you should be doing. This book is important because it addresses that problem directly. Instead of staff networks being a short chapter or a paragraph, this book places staff networks front and center. And this means that it can go deeper into building an understanding of what you can achieve with your staff networks. Or as the book would say, the incredible power of staff networks. Now the book has got 10 chapters, and I would say it's divided into 2 parts. The first 3 chapters make up the first part of the book. And this is where staff networks are introduced, and this is where a case is built about why you need one in your organization. The final 7 chapters make up what I would call the second part of the book, and they're concerned with how to organize and run a staff network efficiently. They discuss things like managing stakeholders, managing members, highlighting the importance of a game plan, succession planning, aligning with the business. All of these things are covered. And who is this book for? Well, I think this book is for anyone who intends to start or lead a staff network. Now, this is made abundantly clear by the first key point in chapter 1, which says, quote, "Consider whether you are the best person to chair a staff network." So that's pretty clear who the audience is. Now, I do think that this book would benefit anyone who supports staff networks in any way, shape, or form. This includes their allies, diversity champions, even members of a D&I team. But the perspective of the book is very much for someone who's going to be in a decision-making role within a staff network. And why do I think that? Well, chapter 7 is called The Team, and it's got a section called Leading with Grace and Building the Core Team. And to me, this very much sounds like advice for leaders. Now, before we get to the key messages of the book, I want to talk about the importance of sharing. If you hear anything that you find interesting, then please share it with one other person that you think would find it useful. Now let's get back to talking about the incredible power of staff networks. So what's the key messages of the book? Well, there are several strong messages in the book, but as always, I've limited myself to 3. The first message is that staff networks have power. Staff networks can be harnessed to create change. And this isn't just a tick box exercise to boost popularity. They genuinely have the potential to create value within your organization. The second message is that managing a staff network requires careful planning and consideration. Just like any successful organization, running a staff network isn't easy, and the book acknowledges this. For example, chapter 5 is called Risks and Maladies, and this very much lays out common issues that staff networks experience and also speaks to solutions for them. Now, all of this tells you that managing a staff network requires planning and consideration. And in short, this isn't something that's just going to take care of itself. The third message I want to mention is that staff networks can operationalize a business case for diversity. And this message is peppered all throughout the book, but the subheading of the book really drives the message home because it describes staff networks as, quote, a beacon which can shine a light on innovation and creative cooperation, cutting across all levels of an organization. And for me, this clearly positions staff networks as an operational entity, not just a social one. Before we get to the key takeaways, if you're finding this for the first time, make sure you check out the show notes. You can access this wherever you're listening to the podcast. The show notes have got details of all the reports and all the resources that are mentioned in the show. I've put this together for you so that you can go deeper into anything that we discuss here. Now let's get back to talking about the book. So key takeaways. The first big takeaway from the book is that high quality leadership skills are required to make a staff network function effectively. And this narrative reflects the expectations of what I consider to be the target audience. Examples of this include the time taken to talk about leading with grace. The second big takeaway is that an interdisciplinary approach is required to succeed. The book contains lots of resources from academics and frameworks from practitioners, but it also makes small but regular references to management and organizational theory. Now, as you can imagine, I'm a fan of this, and it does this when it's talking about things like extrinsic and intrinsic motivation, talking about Belbin's 9 group roles, and there's lots of other stuff as well. So it shows that a real interdisciplinary approach is being employed. The third and final takeaway is that staff networks can be a force for good. They have the power to create change and the potential to create value within your organization, but also beyond. And this leads me to other considerations. Now, when I first picked up the book, I had to flick through it and I noticed several acronyms. For example, power, purpose and potential, opportunity, wisdom, expectations, responsibility. And then there was crystal, challenging and collaborative, resourceful, yearning for improvement, strengthen the members, transparent, accountable, lead the way. Now, me being who I am, I was quite excited about what this meant and what could be learned about each of these principles. However, when I read the book, I felt that not enough was made of them. I even thought they'd be really useful as a framework for the book itself. Another thing that I noticed was that there were a couple of times in the book where I felt as if the staff networks were specifically intended exclusively for underrepresented groups or for attribute-based groups around social identity. Now, I know that's not what the book actually meant, but just from reading it, that's what it felt like. Now, as a regular listener, you know that here we define these groups, staff networks or employee resource groups, as voluntary groups of employees who share a social identity, values, or interests. This book felt that it was intended for identity and didn't consider the value or interest-based groups. I don't think that was the intention of the book, and I didn't pick up on that explicitly, but just from reading it, that felt like the lens that was being presented. The other thing I would have loved to have seen would have been a deeper dive into some of the recommendations. Given that this book has very little competition, I think that there was room to dive deeper into presenting solutions to some of the challenges that were presented. Now, if you want to discuss this with your friends and colleagues, I've created a slide deck for you. It summarizes everything that we discussed today because I want to give you the tools that you need to make a difference where you work. It's free and you can access this from the Resource Groups community on LinkedIn. So let's wrap this up. What are the key messages here? 1. Staff networks have power. 2. Staff networks can represent a business case for diversity. And 3. Staff networks require careful planning and consideration. So what do you think? How powerful are your staff networks? Get in touch or leave a message. I would love to hear from you. If you've learned something from today's show, you should sign up to our insider list. It's free and you can stay ahead of the pack and get the best of everything that I produce. Thanks for listening, and I will see you in the next episode.